Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. And as always, before we jump into today's show, I do have to plug our Patreon. It is how we keep the lights on. I know if you're an avid listener of this show, you're probably sick of me plugging this, but like I said, it is how we keep the show going. So if you do get a chance, pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. It starts from £3 a month. That's about 10p a day. It's like buying me a cup of coffee once a month, and you get a ton of bonus material on there. We do a Q&A every week with the guests. So if you like the show, so if you like today's show, you're going to get a little bonus one on the back of this where the patrons get to ask questions. And a lot of the time there are questions that me or Margaret have missed. So there is a lot of information in those. As well, we do story time episodes with Claire Moulet and Jonas Lorentzen. So the best thing is just to go on to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast, check it out, and you get all the episodes going forward and the back catalogue as well. So yeah, and if you can't, just a 5-star rating, positive review, like, share, all those things do help the podcast more than you realize. It helps new people discover the show and what we do. But without ado, let's get into this episode. So Margaret couldn't join us today. She's sick, unfortunately, so she will be back next week. So I'm going solo again for the first time in a while. But yeah, my guest today is Reece Saul Foster, and you may know him as Saul Forged. And you are the caretaker of a 270-year-old forge in Ireland, is it? Am I right, Reece?
That's absolutely correct. Yep.
Yeah. Can you maybe just tell us a little bit about the forge in better ways than I put it just then?
Absolutely. So the forge was set up 270 years ago. There's a lot of history involved with the town and its building. But specifically, it's a stone building. It's made with heritage craft in mind. It's lasted as long as it has because it's built well. The fire is a stone fireplace, a stone hearth. With a stone floor. There's grinding wheels on the floorboard, on the floor, sort of pebbles, and then there's also a pit where I keep my coal. So there's a load of history, 270 years worth of history going through. There's a few books I have at the moment which tell the history of the Lions, which are the most recent family. I say recent, even though it's about going back 180 to 200 years ago is when their family took over. But a lot of history on their family lineage going through the forge, as they've been the main proprietary carers and blacksmiths in the forge up until 14 years ago, when a new blacksmith came in, a copper worker. But before that, it was always owned by the Lyons family, which is the family that still reside and live in Mount Shannon to this day, and are the ones that are looking over my work and making sure that I'm doing the right thing for the forge. And that's the most important thing, is that I'm making sure that I'm being mindful of this history. This history is very important to us, and it's very important to this country. And if I'm to come into a forge in Ireland, I need to pay my respects and my dues when I walk into the door.
Yeah, I love that. So, okay, you don't have an Irish accent, so
I don't.
How did you end up in a forge in Ireland then? I guess, or where are you originally from?
I'm a Cornish man, boy.
Yeah,
so I'm a proper pirate. But I moved here. I moved here 4 years ago because of my ex and extra reasons. I ended up living off grid there for a couple of years. So I was milking goats by hand, shearing sheep by hand. I was making mead. I built a barn, helped build a barn, cut logs down, cut trees down with an axe by hand, cut the turf by hand. I was doing most of the work. I gathered all of the wood for the year. So I was living a proper off-grid sort of lifestyle for the first couple of years whilst COVID was happening.
Was this just for yourself, or were you doing this
This was for myself in a homestead. This was with my ex and her family at the time.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I had an incredible amount of experience that was given to me, and lived off grid in the off grid lifestyle for some time. I learned how to kill, gut, skin. I preserved a goat skin hide for my daughter, for a changing mat for before she was born.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that's different.
It is,
But
yeah.
yeah, it's a good way to use, what's naturally there.
Absolutely. And for me, being one with the land and being connected to the land is the most important thing. It's understanding the materials that are around you, understanding what you can utilize, and learning more in depth about what your surroundings are. And that's what led me into a lot of my craft that I do these days.
So were you a blacksmith before, or has all your training come within this setting?
Yeah. So I for the past 2 years I've been a blacksmith. So I've been in the forge for just over a year now. It went a year last month. So I haven't been in the forge for very long. And then the year prior, I was studying as a blacksmith part-time in a blacksmithing college, whilst I was also a stonemason. And I was doing stonemasonry for a little while there. And then before that, I was living off grid. And then before that, I was a youth worker.
Oh, okay. So there's been a big shift.
Yeah. I remember because I moved over to Ireland, as I say, for going on 5 or 6. God, can't even remember. But I was a youth worker at the time. I was an avid gamer, and I loved foraging and outdoor education. I love doing things outdoors. I started brewing mead at the time. So I was getting used to alcohol brewing. I was getting used to those kinds of things. But I didn't have a great outlet. And then I moved to Ireland and I lived off grid, and there was no more gaming because there was no more electricity. So I basically just went from 0 to 100 really quick.
Yeah.
So, before that, doing youth work, I would be doing outdoor education stuff anyway. And I was very much into mental health and well-being. So a lot of that has transformed throughout my work into other things anyway. But as it transitioned through, went off grid, started doing all of that, lost like 2 stone, almost fucking immediately.
I bet that change in lifestyle is just a shock
it's insane.
to the system.
It's fucking insane. Nobody prepares you for it. There's a beautiful romantic idea of living off grid, but there's no fucking romance when you actually do it.
Okay, so I was having this conversation with a friend yesterday actually, and he was like, "Oh, it must have been so boring back in the day, whether it's 1,000, 2,000 years ago or whatever." He's like, "Yeah, it must have just been so boring. You had all this free time and you just sat around." And I feel like you could settle this argument for me, because I was like, no way. You have to go collect the wood. You have to build whatever needs building. You have to raise the cattle, farm. Like, there can't be a moment's rest.
There is not a moment's rest, because there's always something going on. Whether it's a good day or a bad day, you work with the weather. So when it's a good day, and when it's in the middle of summer or spring going on summer, you're weeding and you're making sure that the vegetable patches are clear. You're building as much as you can, but that requires gathering the materials. And whilst I was there on the land, I made a forge, but I gathered all of the materials myself and did everything by hand. So I dug down to the clay. Then I gathered stones from the river and stones that were left over from other work on the roads. I'd gather them in hand carts and I'd bring them back to the foundation. I'd lay the foundation and then I put other things down. I dug a channel on the outside. I did use a bit of concrete and some metal wire, and then I went into the forest. I gathered logs and timber to do the posts. I mortised and tenon joined the whole building, and then I roofed it myself by hand with 240 tiles. So
who taught you to do this?
You just fucking do it. Like I sometimes, and this is the thing, like I was there on the land learning what I could, but at the end of the fucking day, you're not going to get anything done unless you just do it. There's and I have this resistance when it comes to certain mindsets of like, oh yeah, but how did you do that and how did you do this? At the end of the day, you just do it. You just take the leap. You know, there's nothing stopping you. That, you know, like at the end of the day, anybody, you know, could find a woodland, whether it's friends or whether it's a local sort of place that you could even just do simple bushcraft. But either way, you just do it. You find it and you do it. But everybody's got this sort of limit that they're held back on. But you just can't limit yourself in life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We all have this, so I think sometimes subconscious fear to take that jump because you're too busy looking at what the negative side could be. It's we all focus on
absolutely
this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong. But unless you take that leap and that chance, you don't really know, and you learn so much more from the mistakes in life. I know I certainly have. From the things I fucked up in my life, I've learned.
Oh yeah.
So much more. Like even when it comes on the business side, when I started Horns of Odin, I was a plumber. I had no idea about business. Like not a clue. I was employed. I wasn't even a self-employed plumber. I didn't know the damnedest thing about running a business, but I just had to figure it out as I went along. And I've wasted a lot of money. Just doing things wrong. You know, just doing things like making wrong business decisions, buying too much stock, or just wasting money on advertising. You know, I've just wasted and wasted, but I've learned as well. And I've learned that the next time, don't do that thing. Try this other thing, and maybe this other thing will work. But if that doesn't work, then I'll try this next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And sure, everybody fucks up. I've been blessed in the start of my blacksmithing business. Like I've been doing it a year. Like
yeah.
Like, and it went from naught to 100 really fucking quick. Because I'm doing the heritage stuff and the experimental archaeology with my friends, you know, and people are really interested in that. But you've got to experiment, and that's all I've been doing since the day dot. I've always been experimenting with different sort of ideas, different sort of ways about thinking how you can do something, and you find what works and the minutiae of it. It's not a recipe. You want to find and tweak. You know, it's the way I brew my mead. Is you let it ferment, you let it, you know, really get going, and then you try different flavors. You open up the mead. You see how it tastes. Is it too sour? Is it too bitter? Is it too sweet? So you add something different and you change something slightly. You don't change the whole fucking thing. You just slightly tweak something. And sometimes the recipe is disaster. But other times you tweak it to a point where it's absolutely perfect and it's absolute gold. You know, and with my Instagram business, it's been almost exactly that. Is that I started off just experimenting and playing, and it's just been a whole load of play for me. Is I've been playing with different materials, playing with the metal, seeing what my hands can do, and seeing what the hammer can do. And sure enough, people have liked what I've made. People enjoy my content, and sure, I'm fucking blessed by it.
Yeah. Yeah, the Instagram stuff I want to get back to later because I think that is a fascinating topic on
absolutely
how people deal with it and go from kind of not having many people watching their stuff to then having a ton of people watching and the pressures that come with it. Because like you say, you play and then suddenly it's not really play anymore. It's like a job.
It is, yeah.
So yeah, let's put a pin in that and come back to it. But I love this idea of like just experimenting and finding your own way of doing things, because that's how, or at least that's what I feel made me stand out when it comes to horncraft. Because I didn't learn off anyone. When I started in my garage and I just figured out how to do it. Nobody taught me. No, I didn't read any books. I just got a horn and like I tried to sand it, and it was taking me forever. So I was like, I need to find a quicker way. How can I do this? I bought a bunch of stuff, found a quicker way to sand it, found a quicker way to polish. And it was just this trial and error and experimentation. But then that also puts you in a position where it's really hard to copy. Because I have a ton of people always wanting to know how I do this, how I carve. Particularly saw from, I get a lot from India. I get messages every day of like, do I want to buy their home products, or how do I like do certain things? And I say, I can't tell you, because it's just my way. That's the way I've developed it. But that also stops you then from, I guess, imitation, because they have to figure out their own way.
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely. Yeah, and there's lots of my own craft which is, inspired, but it's not it's not exactly the same, and a lot of my stuff is entirely unique. Like a lot of the things I'm making are original, my own work, and things that have just come out of my own mind hole.
yeah.
And
Well, the stuff of yours that stands out to me is where you get the contrasting metals together.
yeah.
I don't really see that very often, and I love that because then when you can, I think it's a very special thing when in your little niche you can find like a little corner where as soon as you look at something, people can go, "Oh, that's Saul Forged." They look at that piece and go, then they just know who it is. They don't have to be an expert in blacksmithing. They can it just stands out because of the way it's done. And I think that's a really special thing and a testament to somebody's craft when they can have that originality of like, this is my way of doing this.
Yeah, and sure, like the blacksmiths, I've seen a lot of a new movement of people, blacksmiths specifically, using steel and copper together. And like it's a beautiful combination. Like I've got my coffee scoops, which went really sort of viral a little while ago, and they're nice riveted. They've got a heart at the back with a nice twist, and it's just very aesthetic. But
Lovely.
it's my own design. Like it's very simple, but very effective. Like it hangs very beautifully. It's got that nice center line. With the twists and the bottom and a little bit of twine, but it's that added material which makes it, as you say, eye-catching. It's those moments when you find a piece and you're like, oh wow, that's really special. But there's more blacksmiths these days using the copper and steel, but it's how I utilize them. It's how I combine the different sort of techniques into things. Like I'll pick it up again and I'll just sort of talk into how many techniques go into this, because it's a few. So when you're looking at the base here, you've got punching of a hole. So this is hole punching. I've got a pattern of hammered, sort of like sort of from a ball peen hammer that's been flattened on the top to have a little bit of a thumb grip. It's just nice and comfortable. It's what you'd expect from a spoon, and it's a simple thing as a spoon. But the last time I made copper coffee scoops, they paid for my car tax.
Okay,
so they went well. They went well. And then for this, they were round bar before. I squared them off and twisted them, so they've got this nice twist pattern. For this, I had to cut into the bar and then I hammered on either side to create this heart shape. I only did a light filing because I don't like to do file work unless I absolutely need to, because it wastes time. So what you're looking for is efficient timekeeping, as well as anything else in blacksmithing. So I made the heart pattern by hammering it myself, and then copper rivets, which is its own skill to do accurately, to make them look aesthetically pleasing, to have them the same size and not different sizes, because they can very quickly look like different sizes. I've got my rune, which is my bind rune for my business, and then dishing copper, which is its own skill again. So even though this is one small piece, and even though this is, you know, an everyday piece you'd have in your kitchen, the amount of different techniques and skills that go into a basic bit of blacksmithing is for me what creates the fascination about blacksmithing. It's the different techniques that when put together create something fantastic. And that's the style. That's if I use techniques together myself, that's the style that makes mine, is the different techniques that you add.
I think myself and a lot of people listening to this, and you can watch this on YouTube for anybody who wants to see the spoon, are now going to want one of those spoons. I feel like I need that for my morning coffee now. You did a very good job of selling that.
There you go.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. Now, one question that I wanted to go back to the week that I missed was, do you think that your kind of freedom and want to experiment in life is what managed you or opened the door so you ended up in a 270-year-old forge after 1 year of blacksmithing? Do you think that kind of has helped you into this? Because I imagine there are career blacksmiths who would love to be where you are.
So for me, I had a multitude of benefits that came with the fact that I was new, is the fact that nobody knew about me, and that I was new on the scene. Now, the man before, Mark Wilson, he's an incredible coppersmith, and the lad who was in the forge before. He wanted somebody young, somebody with a young energy to come into the forge, and somebody he didn't know. He's very particular about the people he knows. And a lot of the blacksmiths he already knew had already been in the forge, but had been in the forge, you know, part-time or were visiting, but they've already got a setup of their own. However, for me, I had no setup. I had nothing. And so at that time, you know, I was an apprentice stonemason. I didn't have a lot under my belt at all in terms of resources. So, you know, having the ability to go into the forge was an absolute blessing more than anything, as well as the fact that Mark wanted to move away from the forge and have his own independence with his own property, and his lungs were being affected by the smoke in the forge. So I was luckily right place, right time to come into the forge, take over as caretaker, and was a new face. All of that, and I just have an incredible drive to restore and to do my work. Like whatever I do, I always put 110% in, because it's what you have to do. You know, my gran, who was really my mother, she always used to tell me, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well, and I live that. Because of what she taught me.
Well, that's wonderful. And I mean this with all sincerity, you probably look the most like a blacksmith I've ever seen in my entire life. So anybody who doesn't know what Reece looks like, please go and look at his Instagram, Saul Forged, because if I was to just draw a blacksmith, it would be you. You have this fantastic hair, this beard, you're well built, you dress immaculate, I think. You just suit it down to a T.
Thank you very much. I've recently been taking on the blacksmith style as of late.
If I can, very well.
Thank you very much, my friend. if I can, I'll plug a business that actually
Of course.
I'd love to support anyway. Is Celtic Fusion Design. They gave me the shirt and the trousers that I'm wearing at the moment, but they're all natural materials and they're made in Ireland. They're beautiful and Celtic inspired clothing.
You know,
So
I
I
was
got
gonna ask you where that shirt came from as well. So I'm so glad that
yeah.
you said this because
There
that
you go.
shirt is lovely. So thank you.
It's fucking
Sorry, carry on.
yeah. So I got these clothes because I wanted to start looking a bit more like a blacksmith anyway. And then I was like, oh, this looks really savage. I'm just gonna
Mhm.
start going to vintage shops and getting loads of different like, you know, overcoats or like jackets, and now it's like down to a T. But when it comes to the hair and beard, I mean, I haven't shaved for maybe 8 years, like clean. So
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
I became a hippie for a while, so the hair grew with it.
It suits you. It, like I said, it all just makes this image of
Oh
what
yeah,
you kind of expect. And it, you know, in those you did some photography in the Forge with using what a 122-year-old camera, am I right?
yeah, an 120-year-old camera with I think it was 50 to 60-year-old film.
Okay.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, and the pictures you just like say if you were to draw a blacksmith, like you just fit, and so it is very fitting that you are now working in this stunning environment.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
can you tell us a little bit more about the forge itself, its
Yeah,
location,
yeah.
and just I guess in and on the back of that, how it all works. You know, like a day in the life of,
Yeah. Okay.
I guess.
Yeah. So the forge is located in a small town called Mount Shannon, next to a giant lake in Ireland called Loch Derg. So if I wanted to, during the summertime and I overheat, I can leave the forge. I'm a minute's walk away from the lake. I can dip in the lake to cool down. I can come back. You know,
Also,
so
if you ever
it's
catch the hair on fire, you can just
exactly
get
run into
straight
the
out
lake.
there. Yeah.
So when I went into the forge, the fireplace itself was broken. So using my stonemasonry knowledge, I reline pointed the whole fireplace and kept the stones in their original place. So I didn't change anything. I made sure everything was kept to heritage standard. The stones were placed in their original position, and there was no more leaking of smoke coming out of the chimney. So I reline pointed the fire and brought everything back to working order.
Do you
So
do you have to ask
yeah.
permission for that? Or
So funnily enough, it was the one thing that allowed me to stay in the forge. So at that time, when before that happened, I was only working 1 or 2 days a week in the forge, and you know, I was still very nervous because in Ireland, you know, when a new face shows up, um, everybody's always skeptical about who it is that's walking in, who's coming into the town, who's going to be doing anything, and I absolutely respect that, especially in a location like the Forge. It has to be respected because it is a heritage location. So I was working in there for a little while, and I told them, if you would trust me, I will do the best in my ability to repair the fireplace to what it was before. Um, please trust me on this. If you like what I did, I'll do the rest of the building. I'll try and do what I can. So I did the fireplace, and the lad saw my work and was like, "All right." So they bought a ton bag of sand, and they said, "You can work here as much as you like."
there you go.
So ever since I've been working towards repairing the forge, bringing it back. It's just a passion project. It's not mine. It won't ever be mine, and I absolutely respect that. It's a heritage location. It's not my location. It's the Lion's Forge. It's not Saul's Forge. You know.
Yeah.
So what I do purely for history. So reline pointing the building, replacing the doors and windows, replacing the roof at some point in the future, maybe. You know, it's all to make sure that that building is going to last another 270 years and keep it on the map, and keep blacksmithing alive by keeping the forge alive. So that's the general premise of that. In a general day of the forge running, I'd come in the morning. I'd like to say 9:30, but usually it's 10:30.
I feel you on that. I'm terrible for that as well.
And it's not an easy job, so it's very time consuming. The social media is time consuming. So everything gets taken up. So I walk into the door, unlock the door, open up the doors. I open up the latch windows, and I chop up my wood. Every morning is just that nice little meditation of chopping up the wood, getting the kindling ready for the forge, sieving through the charcoal, sieving through the coal, sorry, getting rid of any slag that was in the forge, which is this glass component which sort of leaks down and dirties the fire at the end of the day. That'll be left over from the day before. So I pick out all of that. I light the kindling, and then I start the bellows. So the bellows I use are 100-year-old French bellows. They've been repaired and maintained for 100 years, oiled and patched. So I'm using the same bellows that generations have used. So
I'm absolutely loving
unhook.
this. I love this so much. I'm so glad that you're doing this.
Thank you. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's a dream come true.
I'm very jealous, but yeah, I speaking to you for what we've been talking half an hour now. I feel like you're such a good person for this. You get a feeling of people. I've been doing this for long enough now. I've spoken to hundreds of people, and you get a sense, and you can genuinely tell just by your facial expressions how much you love this and how much respect you have for it. And I can clearly see, and so many people listening to this will be able to hear that you are the right person to be there. Your love for it like oozes out, and it's it's a lovely and it's a magical thing to see.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Sorry, please carry on. I had to get that out.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate.
I was bursting with admiration there because I just love it. Yeah, I love stuff like this. It's a huge love of mine, it's a huge passion. So yeah, please carry on. You get the bellows going.
Yeah, so I unhook the bellows, so the bellows are hooked up at the end of the day, because you don't want to leave the bellows flat, because that wrinkles the leather and can cause it to crack. So I hook it up every evening and I unhook it every morning. So I unhook the bellows and I let the bellows press down, and that lights up the kindling more. So I then pile a bit of coal on top and get the fire ready. And then I'm there for maybe 10-15 minutes, pumping the bellows and getting the forge to the right temperature to be able to work. And then
how big are the bellows? Just because the way you're pumping like over your like above your shoulder, which kind of makes me think these are not small hand bellows.
No. So the bellows are about a meter wide. Meter and a half. Meter and a half wide. Meter. Yeah.
Pretty big.
And they're about a meter and a half, 2 meters long. And they've got a big bar over the top, which attaches to a chain and a ring, which I pull with my arm. So the whole system works perfectly. It's like super efficient. Huge bellows. It's why I started rock climbing, because one half of me looks like I go to the gym every day, twice a day, and the other part of me looks like a fucking wet noodle.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah. So I'm pumping the bellows all day, and this is my tong hand, and this is my bellow and hammer hand. So I'm doing all of the work with this side of my body, and this side of my body is generally just holding the material. I start the bellows, make sure it gets to the right temperature, and then I get it to the temperature that I can work at. Now, depending on what I'm doing, that temperature is going to vary. If I'm doing smaller projects, like my Panania brooches, which are the brooches that I've been making this week. I require very little heat for these. You know, they're very fine work. They've got the fine leaf patterns on the front and the small little vine areas. So I have to have the fire kind of quite low, otherwise I'll burn the piece. But say when I'm doing a larger piece, for instance, I forged this Viking style blacksmith hammer for myself, and this is made out of wrought iron. And wrought iron is different to steel in that wrought iron needs to be sparkling hot, which is white hot. So it needs to be about 1,200 degrees to be able to work. So I'm working at white hot temperatures, sparkling temperatures, temperatures which otherwise you wouldn't want to be working in unless you're doing something large or you're working with wrought iron.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that has to be tough when you're doing something quite physical and in those temperatures. And you know, I've been on your Instagram. I've seen those little windows. They're not big. They're not letting much breeze through.
Yeah, but they have to be little. They let a lot of breeze through. Funnily enough, I've got two different windows. So the breeze comes through, it circulates. But the whole idea of a forge is you have to have neutral light. You can't have direct light, because when you're working in the forge, you have to see the temperatures that your work is being produced at. So as I said, for wrought iron, you need 1,200 degrees, you need white heats, you need sparkling heats. But for steel, you need yellow heats to forge, really. You don't really need the white heats unless you're fire welding. Fire welding is where you're connecting two pieces of steel after they've been pulled out of the fire or in the fire sometimes. But you need those high temperatures for steel. Otherwise, you can forge in yellows. Forging is the process of moving the material, whereas the shaping and the finishing are in lower temperatures. So the shaping is orange heats. So say you've got a square bar and you need to turn it into an octagonal bar, you'd be using an orange heat because you want to see the metal. When it's a yellow heat, it's hard to see the lines. Whereas if it's a lower temperature, you can see the perfect lines in them. So an orange heat is much better for those shaping, but not forging and completely flattening. And then once you're getting the correct shape, you've got a finishing color. So you're going down into lower temperatures again. So you're moving into those red colors and those gray colors. Even if the material is 300 degrees Celsius, it doesn't look hot. So you've got to be careful of what you're picking up. So you're always picking up something with the tongs, or you swear profusely and you burn your hand. That's generally the two
How
ways.
many times has that happened?
Too many times to be able to honestly say. I've lost feeling a little bit in my right hand. But that's it's part of the job, isn't it?
I guess. Yeah, sure.
Those gray colors, they're still 300 degrees. You can still finish a piece. You don't want to be doing a large amount of work, but what you are doing in that color is you might be hammer polishing. That's the process by which you'd hammer a piece of steel until the surface is perfectly flat. So rather than sanding a piece down because it's too rough, you'd hammer polish so you don't need to sand as much. So you're basically doing all of these processes to reduce the amount of work you need to do in the future. That's if you're doing it effectively and efficiently.
Okay. Because this is probably going to be super offensive to blacksmiths, but I don't mean it to be. For me, my biggest insight into blacksmithing, I guess, would be having a small period of my life where I was obsessed with forged in fire. And I'm sure that's probably this. I knew you were going to make that noise. So, but I assume that is the same for a lot of people. Like popular TV shows like that give people kind of this little window into a world that we don't really get to see. And when you were saying that, that got me thinking about how obviously they have access to all these state of the art machines, and they're just like hawking off like chunks and chunks of steel to get it down to that smooth finish. Yeah, and I guess I was wondering whether having access to those machines almost makes people a little bit more lazy, I guess, in the techniques, because they don't have to maybe do what you have to do because you don't have the kind of luxury of
Yeah.
a grinding belt.
Exactly. I've got no electricity. The only electricity I have are my battery packs for my hand grinder and for my drill, my hand drill, and that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. And when they're done through the day, which they will be very quickly, that's it. And I think it does cause people to be complacent. I think because of the way people used to do things, they used to do things incredibly efficiently. And there used to be amazing tools that people would have used to make those jobs faster. Now, it's very strange that I'm working alone. A blacksmith wouldn't really ever work alone. A blacksmith would have another apprentice in the forge, or they'd have a gang of other people, and rather than using a power hammer, they'd have like 3 apprentices smashing down with sledgehammers to make things faster. But for me, I'm by myself, so I have to make it work. So, with that in mind, I end up creating things like this. Like this Viking style hammer, for instance. So because I don't have a power hammer, I need to learn how to fire weld. And I wanted to learn how to fire weld anyway, because it's an incredibly useful skill to have as a blacksmith. And people generally say, if you don't know how to fire weld, you're not truly a blacksmith. In that, so this hammer is comprised of 2 separate steels. So there's 2 faces, the cross peen section and the head. This is high carbon steel, and so's the tip here. If I bring this to the camera, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it. There's a slight V cut in.
Okay, yeah.
You might be able to see better on this side. Yeah, that little V at the front there. So I had to cut this tail open until it was like a Y. And then I wedged a bit of tool steel inside, and then I had to close that up and then fire weld that together. So that means I get to a white temperature, I seal it up, and then I smash it down. But if this whole hammer was in tool steel, it would take me 2 days. It would take me a day. It would take me 2 days. This would take me half a day. And it's so much more beautiful anyway. The midsection being wrought iron, the 2 front and back ends being tool steel. You can get a beautiful shine on the front and back, and you've got this beautiful line going through from the wrought iron. For those uninitiated into the specific materials in blacksmithing, wrought iron is iron that's 80 to 100 years old. Nobody's made wrought iron since. Because the standards to steel changed, and steel was more structurally sound and stronger than wrought iron. But the beautiful thing about wrought iron is it has its own grain structure like wood. It's the same as bog iron. So iron naturally wants to sway into its own sort of lines. So you end up having these beautiful like grain patterns on the side of materials, where otherwise you wouldn't see them in modern hammers and modern tooling. So I get to play with these beautiful materials that are efficient to use and easy for me to fire weld, because wrought iron also has its own wrought iron has its own what is it called? Flux. Flux is like the sort of silica inside, and that helps pieces of steel weld itself together. So it fire welds to things incredibly easily.
So what would be the purpose of putting that bit of iron in the middle of those 2 pieces of steel?
It would be a cheaper kind of core to use. It's the same weight. It'll stay strong, but it's not taking a hit, but it's not going to change shape. So what's the purpose of using a tool steel? For instance, like just as an example, right? So I'm doing the things with bog iron at the moment, and this will bring a bit of a picture into people who don't understand why I'm doing that a bit better. Is that when you're doing a bog iron smelt, right? You get maybe 4 to 6 blooms. They can be refined down, and then 2 blooms could make a hammer. But it requires a lot of work. However, if you want to change that iron into a high carbon steel, you have to carburize the iron, which wastes more iron and burns it off and turns it to slag. So you've got this very precious material already being burnt away and turned into something else and reduced even further. And in terms of an older way of doing things, you wouldn't want to put a very precious material at the center of your hammer, because it would be a waste of time and a waste of effort, not when you've got a perfectly sound material to use as the core. And the faces could be the working faces. They could be the thing that needs the strength. But, the core is absolutely fine, whether it's mild steel or high carbon steel. It's just the case that we're so abundant in high carbon steels now that we just make high carbon steel hammers all the time. However, if you look at hammers from back in the day, they would have never had high carbon steel centers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you're saving on that valuable material because it doesn't need to be there. It is valuable, and like you say, we have an abundance of it now. So what's bog iron? It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so bog iron is incredible. I do bog iron smelting with my friends, Gwilym and Alan, and they run a business called Irish Bloomery Iron, and they are incredible at smelting, possibly the best in Ireland, and most of Europe. Like the French have a good team, but truth be told, there's not many people doing it. So, bog iron is iron that has grown on the bog. It self-regenerates every 100 years, and it's fully sustainable.
Wow.
Yeah, so bog iron only occurs in bogs that are acidic, because there's 2 specific bacterium which live in the acidic peat bogs, which convert the iron into the material that you collect to smelt. So there's one bacteria. The bog, if nobody knows, is a wetland. It's constantly flowing water all the time, and there's channels of water going through all the time from underneath the ground and also from rainwater. And that's flooding the water with iron oxide, which is pretty much rust that's just flowing from the Earth's core and from everywhere, from underneath us. We're basically a ball of rust. So all it's doing is bringing up the iron oxide from deep in and bringing it to the surface. So that's flushing through the bog. And the first bacteria love iron oxide. So they eat the iron oxide and they convert it in the process of eating it into a ferric salt, so an iron salt. And there was a second bacteria which then developed after that first one, because they like the ferric salt. They eat the ferric salt and they convert it to a more condensed form of iron oxide in the sort of looks of what it would look like to be a pumice stone. So they eat this ferric salt and deposit it in these more sturdy deposits. And these deposits can be as small as your fingernail or as big as your head. And the only thing in a peat bog, because it's made of sphagnum moss, layers and layers of sphagnum moss over thousands of years, the only thing that's solid in a bog is either old wood or bog iron. So you can get a rod and you can prod in the bog and you can find these pieces of iron. Or alternatively, as my friends do, the Irish peoples, they would have cut turf. So they cut the turf down and dried the turf. Turf is this peat, and this is perfect for burning in fires. So they cut turf over hundreds of years, and they get to the surface layer. They get between the clay and where the water has been flowing, and then the peat. But where the water has been flowing is where the iron has been building over thousands of years, maybe. And that creates an iron table, which is a thin table of iron deposit, which has been created by this bacteria. So you collect that, crush it down into dust, and then you smelt that with charcoal equally. So you get a kilogram of charcoal and a kilogram of bog iron, and you smelt that in a furnace. Furnace which is made out of clay and sand, 50-50 mix, and a bellows. And you do charges. So you do 10 to 12 charges worth of these kilogram of charcoal and kilogram of iron. And what you're left with is a bog iron bloom, which is a piece of bloomery iron. It's very rudimentary. It needs refining. It's full of slag, which is the silica that naturally occurs in the soils. So it's basically just a molten bit of iron and glass that is that needs refining. So you get this bloom, you refine it down into an ingot, and then you can work with it and create sort of jewelry out of it. So thanks to the lads from Irish Bloomery Iron, I make my own bog iron jewelry. So I've made bog iron shield pendants. So these are Viking shields that I've made out of bog iron. A few different patterns that are left. Because of the process of bog iron and bog iron refining, it's very intensive. My friends cut down the trees, create the charcoal themselves in a charcoal burning pit. They then store the charcoal, and then they build the forges and furnaces themselves, use the charcoal they've made themselves with the iron they've collected themselves, smelt it down themselves, refine it themselves, and turn it into something else.
Wow.
It's a pricey material. It's a lot of work. And historically, smelters and blacksmiths would have always been separate. But because of this day and age, because there's not many people doing it, we're doing it both. I sometimes smelt with my friends, but I'm starting to support them more because my business is going well. And they've opened up their Irish Bloomery Iron. They're selling it themselves. If you are a knife maker or whatever, you can get a hold of proper Irish Bloomery Iron from them. Or alternatively, I turn it into jewelry.
Wonderful. So a smelter, is that somebody who does the process of taking the very, very raw material and making that into an ingot that you can then work with? And then a blacksmith would be somebody who would take that solid piece of metal and then produce something from that.
Yeah, so originally, historically now, specifically in the Viking Age, all Viking axes, all Viking hammers, all of them would have been made out of bog iron. All of that iron that the Vikings used was bog iron. So what you think of as like a Viking axe or a Viking sword, they've all been made from the bog. None of them were mined. So when you're talking about traditional Viking style craft, if you want to get Viking, do bog iron. So the Vikings specifically, and the Irish, and some of Britain, they would have broken those stages up. You would have had the poor quality, so the poor workers. They would have gone out into the bog and they would have collected the bog iron. That was a peasant's job. Those would have been lads which collected the ore you needed, but that was their job. That was all they ever did. Then you have the smelters. The smelters are the people which took the process of taking the ore, smelting it down. It was a very secret craft, so it's hard to get back the history. It's only been being revived for about 15 to 20 years, but before that it's been dead for hundreds, because there's been no knowledge. Everything's been very secretive. So these smelters, they would have done their process of refining their iron down, they would have gotten the blooms and maybe refined it. I don't know whether that stage also included the refining, but possibly refining. They would have produced this iron. And then the blacksmiths would have been the last stage, is producing those pieces of steel into something much more shaped and much more efficient. Be that armor, be that jewelry, be that swords and knives and tools. However, the smelters would have been able to create the metals that they needed, be it high carbon for axe faces or hammerheads, hammer faces, or the mild steels for the core. It would have been a very secretive skill to have.
Wonderful. Okay, we've been doing about an hour. So yeah, let's wrap up the main show, and then we'll jump over and let the patrons ask you some questions, and we will delve into maybe looking a bit closer at some of the items. And I also want to chat about Instagram, because I know that you've kind of completely gone into a whole new world of I don't necessarily like the term Insta famous, but you've got pretty popular on there now, and you've got quite a following. So yeah, I'd love to talk about that and that kind of side of things. So yeah, let's put a pin in it here, and then anybody who's listening, if you do want to hear more from Reece, then please do pop over to our Patreon. It's just Patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast, where we're going to get into those other things. Yeah, Reece, I mean this with absolute complete sincerity, that episodes like this really do make me feel so grateful for why I make and do this podcast every single week. This has become one of my fast favorite episodes I've ever recorded. You can tell you're a very sweet and genuine human who does what they do out of a pure love for it. Your knowledge is fantastic. You speak well. I only have kind things to say about you, and I thank you very much for coming in and sharing this wealth of knowledge with us. Yeah, I've absolutely loved this beyond belief. We're going to have to talk. We're going to have to do some sort of collaboration.
Absolutely, my friend.
We have to do something. I think you're the perfect person for the Forge, and I completely commend the work you're doing. And I've loved it very much. So thank you. If you can give a shout out to where people can follow you, buy your stuff, please feel free.
Yeah. Thank you. So you can find me on my Instagram page, Saul Forged, SAUL Forged, or you can find me on my Etsy page, same name, Saul Forged, no space. As well as I'll plug my friends who are doing the Bloomery Iron. They are Irish Bloomery Iron, BLOOMERY, Bloomery Iron, and they make the iron themselves. They've just started, and because of my boost in Instagram exposure, they've been able to open up their own business of their own passion too. So I wouldn't be here without them, and also I'd love to support them too. So if you could follow Irish Bloomery Iron and you follow Saul Forged, you can see both of our journeys, because we collaborate. We're good friends, so we collaborate all the time. So follow their journey of how they're bringing smelting back. Just to say as well, we are doing a smelting festival at Carraconnell Fort in the Burren on the 24th and 25th of August. So we're going to be showing people how to smelt. We're going to be doing the whole process. There's going to be smelters and some blacksmiths from England coming over. So if you're interested in seeing that, go to the Carraconnell Fort website and book your spaces. They are limited spaces, limited availability. So if you want to see us smelting, if you want to meet me in person and see me blacksmithing, book your space now.
Yeah, wow, there we go. I want to come to that. I want to
Yeah,
come and
absolutely.
that sounds
I'd love for you
amazing.
to come. That'd be
That
awesome.
sounds that sounds amazing. Even if not, I would love to come and visit the forge. That would be amazing to come and just hit some stuff. You can teach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can make a yeah. Oh, yeah. We will talk after. If you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Farrand1 or the business at Horns of Odin, and then again the podcast just on all the different channels, Nordic Mythology podcast. And yeah, let's wrap this up. And I feel like we're going to continue for another little while after.
Yeah.
So perfect. Thank you very much.